We have here a 1985 Volkswagen Cabriolet, and this has been the subject of a previous video. You can look up in the cards and see the previous diagnosis video there. The customer's concern is that it won't start. Follow along as we diagnose it. Okay, I'm going to try and start this. And that's basically what it does. I tried to get this thing to start a few times in the parking lot to drive it in, but we ended up having to push it in. I couldn't get it to start at all. When it was here before, it had a fuel related problem, so I'm going to put a pressure gauge on it and make sure it's getting fuel. See, it really seems like it wants to try and start. Let me get the fuel pressure gauge on it. And the reason I'm trying for fuel first is because when I diagnose, I go with a system called FAST. So fuel, air, spark, timing, and sometimes people add on the back tech. So fast tech is the acronym you'd use to try and diagnose a no start problem. So let's start with fuel first. If you look at the other video, you'll see a more in-depth explanation of what this is doing and what this is for. But you can see here, I already have fuel pressure here because I've already tried cranking it. And there's definitely fuel pressure there. Let me show you what happens when I try and start it. Try and get the glare off of it. And with this system, this is showing you the ability of the system to control fuel pressure, but what you can do is shut off this valve right here, and that shows you the ability of the fuel pump itself, how much pressure it's able to make. So I'm going to shut that valve off, and that basically just shuts off the ability of the distributor and the cold start regulator to affect fuel pressure. And you can see there that's all working normal. Okay, with regards to our fast tech diagnosis, the next thing would be air, and I kind of feel like air is a hard subject to quantify because really there ain't much on this engine that could cause it not to get air. You know, some diesels might have a flapper valve that can close off air. Some mechanic might have left a shop towel in there and block off air and stuff like that. So you have to consider it. But the air part of the fast tech has only caused a no start problem for me once or twice, and that was with a flapper valve on a diesel that was stuck closed. So anyway, we're going to move past air in this one, and we're going to go to spark. And I don't really think this is a spark issue because it keeps trying to start. It'll start and run for just a short period of time and then it'll die. But is it getting spark for a short period of time and then losing spark? It's really hard to say. Let me grab my spark tester and we'll check it for spark. Well, I'm madder than a fat cop who dropped his donut watching it roll down a hill. I can't find my spark tester. This happens to me a lot. Folks will use my tools and they'll put them back in the wrong spot and then I can't find them. You know, you can always use the old Phillips screwdriver in the spark plug wire and hold it near the ground to see if it sparks. Just recently I watched a Scanner Danner video and I think he said something along the lines of all that tests for is how conductive your screwdriver is. So But right at this point, I don't really have any choice, and I'm going to do the best I can. Well, I think what I'm going to do is pull the spark plug out and use the spark plug as a spark tester. A little bit carboned up, but you kind of expect that on a vehicle that's not starting. Okay, I'm going to try and wedge this in here where we can see it somewhere. And I'm going to try and give it a ground right there. And then we'll watch that through the camera to see if it sparks. That's a terrible angle. Let me change angle. Reaching through the window to start that, I could see that it was getting spark. I hope you could see it on camera too. Now, so with regards to our fast tech no start diagnosis, we know we have fuel, and the reason I say that is because our fuel pressure gauge reads good. We put injectors in it the last time it was here, if you watched that video, and we also, when we were in the parking lot, we sprayed fuel in it to substitute fuel, and that didn't make it start. And so now we've checked spark, and spark seems to be relatively good. So the next thing is timing. Now, I would love to put a timing light on it to check timing right now, but unfortunately I don't have one. I had a timing light. Understand, I've been in the business a long time, so of course I have a timing light, but I've had a timing light. It's an old Craftsman timing light, and I've had it since I was 19 years old. And I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but that was a long time ago. So it did quit on me 2 years ago or something. I was actually using it on a bug, and the wire where it connects into the timing light broke away, and I'm just like, I hardly ever use this thing anyway, so I ended up throwing it away. It really wasn't fixable, because I love to save money and fix tools, but it really wasn't fixable, so I threw it away. And it's been 2 years since I've needed a timing light. Now, every once in a while the old air-cooled bugs do come in, and I need a timing light for that, so I should probably get a timing light, but it's going to be hard for me to check timing right now because I don't have a light. So let me think about this problem for a while, and we'll get back to you. Okay, we're getting back to the diagnosis on this Rabbit, and what we have going on is I should probably just go down and buy a timing light, but at this point we're going through the acronym of FAST Tech, and the first T in FAST is for ignition timing, and so we don't have a timing light for that, but the second T in Tech is for timing like cam to crank correlation, like the timing belt had jumped a tooth or something. Maybe it won't run with the timing belt jumped. For all we know, it could have smacked the valves. I'm not sure if this is interference engine or not, but what we're going to do is we're going to pull the timing cover off, you know, right there, and check the cam to crank correlation. At least it's an easy timing cover to pull, huh? Okay, let's get this rotated around to top dead center. Took me a while to remember, but there's a timing mark right here, and that timing mark lines up with the valve cover surface right there. So we need to rotate that around to where the timing mark lines up there, and then the mark should line up down on the pulley down there. You can see I've paint marked it right here where the timing mark is, so that mark needs to line up down there. Okay, I'm going to look down at the crankshaft, see if it's lined up. It's really close. So here's what we got. We got a paint mark there on our cam gear, and it should line up with the valve cover. And it's got a mark on the back side also, which I've paint marked. You see it lines up pretty well with the valve cover right there. It's pretty hard for me to make out on the camera, but there is a paint mark on the pulley there in the mark. And then over on the timing cover, you can see an arrow or a triangle. You can see those two marks are lined up, and so probably our timing belt hasn't jumped time. Okay, so we know our cam to crank is in time, and we haven't jumped a tooth on the timing belt. And the next two letters in our fast tech diagnosis is E for exhaust, and that would have to be like a plugged exhaust, and it would have to be really plugged in order for it to not start the car. Plugged exhaust causes a lack of power long before, for instance, if you had a catalytic converter that was failing and breaking up and clogging off the exhaust, it would cause a lack of power long before the car would ever fail to run. Of course, you could have some event like mud getting caked inside the exhaust, or somebody sabotaging you and plugging off your exhaust. If you remember from Eddie Murphy, Beverly Hills Cop, there was, "We don't fall for the old banana in the tailpipe." So I'm not convinced that it could be, and I've never seen it, by the way. I've never seen a car not run due to clogged exhaust, but it certainly is possible. And then the last one is compression. I don't really think it's compression either. All four cylinders wearing out the piston rings at the same time, all four cylinders brake cracking a valve at the same time, just doesn't sound legitimate. So I have to go back to our ignition timing, and I'm trying to come up with a way I can check that without a timing light. Now, why would I be thinking timing? Years ago I had a Ford Bronco, and it had a distributor. The bottom of the distributor had a gear on it, and the gear was held in place by a rolled pin, and that rolled pin had broken. Now the gear wasn't rotating on the shaft, but it rotated a quarter turn, or a significant amount anyway, to where the spark was no longer happening where it should have been. And that was a real tough diagnosis for me, because it had fuel, it had fire, and I didn't know enough to go much farther than that. So eventually I figured it out, but it was a tough diagnosis for me. Understand, I do come from a transmission background, so didn't have much in the way of engine diagnosis way back then. If this has a problem with the gear on the end of the distributor, it might be out of time that way. Now, there was a Pine Hollow Auto Diagnostics video where Ivan took a relative compression waveform and synced it with the #1 cylinder, and he could tell that the spark was happening not at top dead center based on that. I'll link to that video if I can find it right up there. So I want to try and do something like that. So I just recently did a video on an in-cylinder pressure transducer. I'll link to that video right there. And you can use that to see when top dead centers happen. Then you can sync that with the spark from the #1 cylinder, and that might be the way to go. So I just need to make a decision on which is going to be easiest for us and go from there. So with regards to the decision to whether to go with in-cylinder pressure transducer or amperage of the starter with a relative compression test, I've decided to go with the relative compression test, as you can see. And the reason why is because my pressure transducer, if you watch the video on it, you'd know, you can watch the video up there, it takes a 5-volt reference to power the transducer. And I, as of yet, have not built a regulator in order to do so. So I'm still relying on the car to provide me with a 5-volt reference. And as far as I know, this car don't have a 5-volt reference anywhere. This is an older car. Later cars use 5-volt reference everywhere, but this one I don't even know if it does or not. So I've decided to go with the relative compression test in order to determine if the spark is happening at top dead center. And I'm just going to try and get a waveform first and then go from there. Okay, let me turn this on. And after I turn it on, my scope shows above 0 volts. So you need to adjust this wheel to make it go down. You can see I'm adjusting it up and down with the wheel, and you finalize the adjustment at 0 volts. And then we need to let our scope know that channel A is being used with a current probe, 600 amp current clamp. And I need to disable the car from starting. And I think in order to do that, since I already have this hooked up, simply turning this valve off shuts off the fuel to the injectors. But we also have a cold start valve over here that would make the car start and then die. So we just need to unplug that. There we go. Now you say, why are we doing this when it won't start anyway? Well, it kind of does start. It kind of wants to try and start, and it seems like it's contributing something, and so that's going to make the amperage, I've dealt with this before, it's going to make the amperage on the starter unreadable. It'll just be, on those times where it tries to start, it'll just be very, very low amperage, because it just makes spikes and noise that you can't identify and you can't see what's going on. So you really need it completely disabled to where it doesn't even try to start. I'm going to crank that and see what we have. Okay, I'm going to pause that. And then scroll back. And that's what I was expecting to get. Now if I run a second channel with spark from the #1 cylinder, it should be on top dead center of one of those peaks. There's my clamp for the #1 spark plug. And I should probably ground this. And the other end of my lead goes to the B channel. We'll restart our scope. See what it shows. And pause it. And then scroll back. Didn't really capture much information here, but if we look at it there, let me zoom in here. Here's the silly thing. I didn't even turn on my B channel. That's a silly mistake. But you can see here it's picking up some inductive spike from the interference from the spark. And you can see it's well after top dead center. So it's probably picking up spark from some of the others sometimes also. So let's actually turn on our B channel this time. So B channel on, auto, and we'll turn the probe on to secondary. Secondary ignition probe positive. We'll restart the scope. And close that down. Okay, now we have a B channel on there. We'll pause it, scroll back. Now I don't really understand everything this is showing me, but I can tell for sure that the spark is happening after top dead center. Now this of course is amperage draw, and of course the highest amperage draw is at the highest point of compression, so that would be very near top dead center. I'm not saying this is accurate enough for every instance, but it's going to be accurate enough here. Well after top dead center, well after the highest point of amperage, which is the highest point of compression, that's when the spark happens. Now that's just an inductive pickup in the A lead. Down here you can definitely see that there's the event happened right here, which definitely corresponds with our inductive spike. Now this second event, I'm not sure what that, I think maybe I laid my scope leads across one of the other spark plug wires, so let's take a look at that. Well, here's the ground lead coming off this secondary probe, and it's very near this spark plug wire. So let me get that off there. Maybe that'll solve it by itself, but then this lead heads out over across the other spark plug wires, so I'm going to take them this direction and move them completely away from the other spark plug wires. We might throw a filter on there also to see if we can filter out some of that, but that's as good as I can get it away from the other spark plug leads. And let's start this again. Close down this window and see what it shows now. Okay, pause it and scroll back. Okay, there is some noise, but I am seeing a pattern. Let me zoom in here. Right about here. Okay, so just on our current waveform, we can see one there, and that's well after the highest point of amperage. So if this is number 1, that'd be 1, 3, 4, 2, and then there's another one, and it's well after top dead center. And then that, of course, let's say that's 1, 3, 4, 2. So there's 1 again, and it's well after top dead center. So 1, 3, 4, 2, and there's 1 again, and right there it's after top dead center. So I'd say our timing is definitely off. It's sparking well after top dead center, not enough to run the car. Now, why is that? Does this have a gear like my old Bronco? We could pull the distributor out and look, or we could just turn the distributor and see if it starts. If the gear is in a stable position, which it seems to be, it doesn't seem to be jumping around or anything. We had a constant 1, 3, 4, 2. It's firing on the same part of the waveform each time, so maybe if we just turn the distributor, we can get this car to run. I'm going to try that.